Hey everybody, welcome to Phil Mike Likes You with your host Phil Mike. That's me. I'm a DC area comic. I've been doing comedy for about 5 or 6 years now in the DC area. And on this podcast, I get to talk to the people I like about the things that they know best. And so I brought on my good friend Cameron Morgan here to talk about Bitcoin. It's something that we're both very passionate about, something we both been holding on to for a long time, and Cameron's done a great job of learning all about it, becoming successful with it, and really understanding all the ins and outs. And so I have him here to help answer your questions about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. So Cameron, thanks for coming on, and we're happy to have you here. And I just kind of want to know, I got into Bitcoin a little after you did, but I am kind of curious as when did you get in, and what was sort of the starting point for like where you were in life, and what got you into it?
Sure. So I guess 2013 would be the year actually. Bitcoin was around $80, I want to say. And this was a couple years out of college. Just got a decent paying job where I could afford to invest. I'm thinking about my family, thinking about how to save correctly, what to do with that money, where are the opportunities, and happened to stumble across Bitcoin, and it was something that was very bizarre to me. I had never thought about the idea of money being outside of, say, the dollar or any other government-controlled entity. How do you have this kind of denationalized currency? Is it a currency? I don't know. But I'm on Reddit. I'm seeing people say, "Hey, man, I should have invested when it was 5 cents. Man, I should have invested when it was $1," and took the plunge. It seemed, from my perspective, having watched kind of my parents go through a lot of fallout from like the 2008 crash, and there's just been a lot of systemic stuff that has irked me. I wish we did more for more people. I wish we weren't picking winners and losers. Sometimes it feels like the system of the game's kind of rigged. It felt like it was stacked against you in a lot of ways. So the idea of gambling on something that I thought was a solution or a cure to a lot of these problems that I witnessed firsthand with my family, it led to me kind of diving into the deep end.
Right.
I still remember I was living in Boston, and I think you and Evan drove to meet me in Boston, and you gave me like $300 in cash to like buy a Bitcoin or something. This was like mid-bubble, way back when. And it was just such a bizarre time, I would say. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody could have imagined, things got to where they are now. It's all just kind of insane, honestly.
Yeah, because I think, when we got into it, it was 2013, and I didn't know that you heard of it, I guess from Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard it from you.
I was like, how do you make money fast?
Right.
That was my motive.
Because I remember when you told me about it, basically, I think it just sort of aligned very much politically with how I felt, where I'm just like, you can't mess with this. It's basically someone can send money to someone, and it can't be manipulated in the total number and all that type of stuff, which we'll kind of get into and everything. But you saw it as a way to simply secure your financial well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty impressive.
Well, it's a gamble. You can just, at the time it was about making money quickly. Okay, I've got, struggling parents. I've got struggling siblings. How do you help out your family? Okay, well, I can earn, 2-3% here, or I can swing for the home run. And, at the time I wasn't thinking in terms of asymmetric bets, but, the risk reward is there. Yeah, this thing could implode, but it could also 10x, 100x. And in a lot of ways, we're still at that point. which is even crazier to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was just came across Reddit, and everyone's got like survivor's guilt or some sort of like weird trauma associated with like that one chance they had to invest in Bitcoin. And
Right.
I don't know, after reading a lot of those, it just got me curious.
So you start learning it on Reddit, and then how do you get to become like where you are now, where you're, as far as an expert, you're basically there, if not well beyond it.
Sure.
So how did you go about learning about it? Because you have to be able to have the wherewithal to write it out for ups and downs. So you also had the nerve to be able to see it through a lot of hardship. Mm-hmm. So what did you do to learn about it and have the sort of long-term vision that you have now?
Sure. I think what helped me make the dive was it was the first thing that made me feel optimistic in regards to a lot of, I mentioned these systemic problems that I feel like I've experienced. What is a way out? This seemed like a cool way out, and it seemed like a worthy bet. If I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose. But if I'm going to win, it's going to feel really good too. So
like so in 2013, 2014, there was like bubble, right?
Yeah.
And so what did you do after that when it crashed? And like, what was your strategy?
So,
or did you not have one?
I was just pausing to think about kind of how the growth in terms of thinking about this thing happened, because the first bubble that I experienced, I cashed out like $10,000 I think, and I felt like, holy shit, right. I'm gonna be all right, like I'm gonna make it. I'm a god. I approached it from this thing that, okay, I can trade this, it's so volatile, maybe I can make 2 to 3%, here and there. Maybe I can make 5 to 10% a week. Like, you just compound that over time, and you're actually looking at some pretty decent returns from a percentage perspective. So, going through that bubble, I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know, the run-up was shocking to me. I had money for the first time. You're out of school, you got, $40K in debt, and you're like, well, shit, like, how am I ever going to pay this off? That was the first thing I did. But riding out that bear market was fucking brutal. You see this thing happen, and you're like, oh yeah, this can happen again. Yeah, history's going to repeat. Of course it will. But it's one thing to zoom out, but when you're living in the moment, it is tough watching like whatever else I had invested, which wasn't much, just lose value pretty rapidly. We're talking about what, like 80, 85, 90% drops with that first bubble way back then. So I think in a lot of ways I was just really stubborn, and having gotten like the short easy win, I was a little more committed to sticking with it. I had gotten enough validation in being able to cash out that 10K where, okay, you know what, I'm willing to rack up some credit card debt. I'm willing to stay in for a weekend and put that money towards, at that point you're buying like a quarter of a Bitcoin, half a Bitcoin, which is just crazy nowadays. But I think that kind of mindset helped keep me, maybe I don't want to say level-headed, because I wasn't level-headed. I was way too arrogant. I got, I made a lot of money, I lost a lot of money. Right. It's brutal.
Well, it keeps you like motivated. And I do think like most people today, when they start getting into it, and I have a few friends trying to get into it now, like they want to get into it because they see the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think it's maybe a good time to just sort of ask like, okay, well, people are familiar with Bitcoin. They understand that it's this thing that is a cryptocurrency that goes from 0 to 100 in no time, and it can go way down. But like, there are real things about it. And so like, if somebody wants to invest, how should they maybe consider what Bitcoin is, and maybe like go into what exactly is Bitcoin, so that someone can put their money in and tell them, be able to not panic as soon as something happens.
Yeah. If you had to explain it like you were 5 or like to a kid, I would describe Bitcoin as just, money that you save versus the money that you spend. That money that you save, you're not thinking about touching it in a couple months, next week, even next year. It's one of those long-term plays, which, it could, this thing could boom. Maybe it has the potential to 10x, this year or the next year. Who knows? But the further out your time horizon becomes, the more likely you are to succeed, I think. So in terms of thinking of that money as this is money that I have spent and thrown away, it is, I don't want to call it a lottery ticket, but in a lot of ways it is. It is out of sight, out of mind. It is not something that you are using to buy a car or, this is going to double so I can, borrow some money, throw it in, and next week I'll pay off my loan. It's not anything like that. You're bound to get screwed. You might have a couple good, wins. You might get streaky and have a couple good days, but, long term is where you really need to be at in terms of investing, I would say.
So, right. And I think like a lot of people are at a point in their lives where, they're millennials and they have a little bit of savings, or like they got a stimulus check or something like that, where you really you can see it as an alternative to your traditional investments, because everyone gets told it's a 401k, or you put like a mutual fund or something like that. But, this thing really, since March 2020, we've gone from $3,500, $3,800 to $60,000, which is extremely different. And so this doesn't perform like anything else. So maybe what exactly is it about Bitcoin and maybe cryptocurrencies in general that makes it so different from anything else that is that lottery ticket?
Yeah.
Like, what are the components in that?
Yeah, I'll try to do that question justice. I feel like it could branch into so many different aspects. I think the biggest unique thing about Bitcoin is, well, I can't even say that. We've got 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. That is a hard cap. There will never be more. I don't want to say there will never be less, but that's just due to the mining reward. It is digital. It is scarce. It can be easily moved to anyone without a third party or another intermediary. In a lot of ways, that's pretty powerful tech. I don't really see it as a replacement to the current system, but I kind of see it as, a parallel system. This digital economy is forming. And I think with this technology, it's with like emergent technology, nobody really understands it at the time. So what makes up Bitcoin? Networks, distributed computing, a lot of economics, a lot of game theory. There are so many different factors and components that go into making Bitcoin what it is, that it's difficult to really see how this thing is going to play out long term. So when we have digital scarcity, we have a unique asset that cannot be seized, taken from anyone. This is yours. You can, if you had 100 Bitcoin, you could store, all of that knowledge in your brain. Okay, I've got this, 12-word password that unlocks this Bitcoin. Nobody in the world can touch this. It's kind of like fuck you money in a way. Like nobody can do anything about it, which is pretty powerful stuff. Now, how you value that is kind of where we get to today. And okay, why is the price at 60,000? Why was it 3,500 less than a year ago, or I guess about a year ago? With the COVID crash. I think over time the narrative is evolving in a lot of ways. This thing was introduced back in 2008, or was it 2009? I forget. But anyways, this thing is introduced and we have this digital cash, this digital money. Okay, well, it doesn't have all of the properties of money. It has a lot of similar characteristics, but can we really quantify it as money right now? And that's a fun question, because you kind of have to break down, okay, what does the monetization of an asset look like? Starting from square one, we have this, digital collectible that's just for a bunch of nerds who, nobody's heard of this thing. You just got a bunch of kind of fanatics who are willing to go all in and, bet on this new technology that they may not fully understand. Then, more people get involved and there's more speculation, and, I think we're in that speculative phase now where nobody's quite sure whether this thing has staying power. Michael Saylor, he got in because he said at $100 billion, this thing isn't going to just disappear. And the evolution of money from that strange digital collectible for like a bunch of like crypto nerds or whatever, moving to, basically speculation. That's why I got into it, to potentially a reliable long-term store of value. That kind of opens up a few pathways, So what do you envision for Bitcoin? It's got all of the characteristics of gold and then some. So are we saying it's going to replace gold's market cap? Well, if Bitcoin can be gold, that's over a $10 trillion market cap. That's like a $500,000 valuation for Bitcoin. That sounds crazy, but could it live up to that potential eventually? Okay, if we're talking about like a full global money, I mean, we're talking about $100 trillion asset, possibly more. What does the path to getting there look like? And a lot of people have thought about that, and there are a ton of great resources. I won't do them justice by trying to explain them from memory, but we have no idea where this thing is going. We have a lot of speculative guesses. A lot of research has been done, a lot of discussions have been had, and from my perspective, I couldn't be more optimistic about the space and the technology right now. It's really exciting, honestly.
Yeah, I think like there's a lot of different interpretations for what Bitcoin can do, and there's some pretty like fun charts where they have people like charting out the narratives where it says like, oh, it's supposed to be this, and like a very popular narrative over a period of time was like it's a currency, like a full-fledged currency, and then another one that's more popular right now is like it's gold and like all this type of stuff. But I feel like one of the things that I've always thought about is why Bitcoin or something like it is so powerful is because it's so kind of simple and pure in a certain way, where it's just like it's so good that it doesn't even matter what direction it goes, because it can go a million different directions. It's just like, its utility is so good and functional in that, like I said, for me, just knowing that you can hang on to it without someone being able to take it easily or being able to send it to someone, like these are just very fundamental desires that humans have and humanity has. And it stretches beyond borders. It stretches beyond, all sorts of biases and whatever. This is just the way people have worked for a really long time. And I think it goes into the idea that is like extremely popular right now, and it's the idea of scarcity, and what exactly is the value in scarcity. And there's a lot of political sort of ramifications from that's happening right now. But, there's only going to be 21 million. So what is kind of the power of that? Because already right now 18 million plus have been mined, so there's only 3 million left, and it feels like this like global game to get them all. So what is the value of it being a scarce asset, especially when it's like talking about gold and all this type of stuff, when we do have this like economic climate where money is a little bit of imaginary even in like the fiat world where it's could be unlimited. So what do you think about just the idea of scarcity and its sort of weight in this?
It's a good question. I don't think I can answer it without comparing it to the current system and just the current monetary policies in place. We can talk about fiat currency and say it's imaginary and all of these things. I think that's kind of a stretch. But we do technically, the U.S. government could, in theory, print, money at any time for anything it needed. That's just the way the system works. So the idea of a scarce asset outside of any current system that can't be artificially inflated or, exchanges, you can have manipulation on exchanges with the price and certain other factors, but the parameters that, that the Bitcoin network has, those can't be manipulated by anyone. So, building up on top of that scarcity element, when I describe Bitcoin as savings technology, that's one of the key elements there. The scarcity means that we have this fixed long-term supply, and we have an ever-increasing pool of people trying to acquire it. Now, that's super long-term. We have an ever-increasing user base because only like 5% of the population is buying this stuff or has access to it. And naturally, when you have a capped limit on the number of coins and demand goes up, price follows. Price keeps going up over a long time, and you get these kind of mania phases. I think we're at the early stages of one now. I don't know if we're at full-blown bubble, though. This doesn't feel like mania to me. I think it's a lot of people recognizing that due to the scarce nature of the asset, $100 billion, it was a great deal. At $1 trillion to a lot of these guys, it's here to stay. Mm-hmm. Ray Dalio, just Friday comes out and says, you know what? Yeah, we should be considering a small percentage allocation to this asset class. I mean, that, to me, I don't know if there's a bigger endorsement in the financial world to kind of validate the scarcity of Bitcoin. Always running, no downtime. Anytime you want to use the system, it is there for you to use. There may be heavy traffic, heavy congestion at times, but as it stands now, this network is transferring $1 million per second every single day, constantly. And I think that's really impressive for this outside parallel system that doesn't have any of the advantages of these centralized systems. I think that's really cool.
Well, and no one controls it. There's no CEO. And the fact is, right, anyone can access it. You can create a wallet, and you don't need to have the same sort of prerequisites to start maybe like a bank account or something like that. It is like universally accessible to a large degree. You just need an internet connection. And so, I think going on to like Ray Dalio and stuff like that, and like guys like from JP Morgan and all these places, like they used to be very cynical about Bitcoin and all this type of stuff. And I think a lot of it had to do with them being ignorant, or at least pretending to be ignorant, because they can see where like it has value. But I think it's interesting that now all of a sudden that they're sort of coming into play, and it does make you wonder, to everyone who bought beforehand, it's like, what did regular people see that these really smart investor types, institutions, didn't or weren't, willing to see? So what do you think it means about when guys like Ray Dalio and stuff like that, who are openly against it, what do you think it means that now they're all of a sudden for it? You got guys like Elon Musk, who everyone wants to be like Elon Musk to, a large degree. They're starting to get into it, and you now have all the haters who are sort of getting into it now. And then on the backdrop of the whole GameStop, Robinhood revolution, whatever you want to call it, like you have this very you have like a lot of powerful forces sort of like entering the market right now. So do you think that a lot of these institutions simply just didn't think it had value and now all of a sudden are, and they're just FOMOing in?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what exactly is happening right now with all of these big places? Just tell me what you think.
I couldn't tie it down to any one thing. The first thing that comes to mind is these people are managing billions of dollars, and when you have an asset that's only worth, $5-10 billion, even $100 billion, allocating any portion of your portfolio into that, you expose yourself to a lot of downside. I would say not much liquidity within the system, and that what's weird is at $30,000, I thought Bitcoin was a better buy than it's ever been before because of that validation, because of the market cap and the liquidity that's entering the market. You get, when you had Elon Musk come out with Tesla and say, oh yeah, we're going to keep X amount on our balance sheets or whatever. It's a lot of validation, and nobody likes to be, the first person to, well, some people do, first person jumping into the pool or this new investment, or they want to make sure it's safe. They want to make sure that if they enter, they're not going to be trapped there. They can leave whenever they want. And we've kind of reached a tipping point where it seems like the liquidity is there. Billions of dollars are traded on the network, every day. That's wild. I don't really think there's any market like it in the world. So in a lot of ways, I think these guys are going to be having fun with it. These new people entering the space. I follow a lot of like quants on Twitter and these old hedge fund guys, investment bankers. And it's weird watching the evolution over the years, I would say. A lot of cynical takes, a lot of laughing it off, a lot of dismissiveness, and then one day they'll be like, oh, these people are so stupid, but then they kind of get pulled into the memes and the culture, and it's this weird they start being like, okay, well, actually this is kind of a fun community, and yeah, I give a lot of shit, but they give it back too. And I don't know, I'm seeing just so many opinions start to change, and I don't know how to fully explain it other than there's just a greater perceived safety. People can look at it without judgment in the same way. I think it's kind of earned its keep here. The passing the $1 or $1 trillion threshold, what was that, a month ago? I think kind of establishes itself as this thing that's here to stay. We are 10 times away from the value of gold. If you think Bitcoin's going to be at gold, buy it. You don't get many 10x opportunities in your life. If you think it's going to be more than gold, I mean, I do. If you can see how that plays out, it still feels like a once in a lifetime opportunity. At each like bubble, who's front running who? You had the nerds front running, the speculators. You had the speculators front running the institutions. And now as you see like institutions start to enter the space, okay, who's being front run here? We're front running the corporations now. We're, ideally, long term, maybe we're even front running, nation states. We're front running the Fed from X country 10, 20 years down the line that realizes that it can just print money and buy this digitally scarce asset. That's the kind of where we are right now. I don't think there's rocket fuel to propel us like super high to like $1 million right now, but I think the levels we're at now are sustainable and could be a long-term floor.
It's interesting because over time you see bigger and bigger dominoes fall. Because at first it's like you have these little ants who are like the little people, who want to take a chance on it, and then you get, like the meme crowd and all that type of stuff. And this goes in waves, where 3-4 years ago we had a 20,000 bubble and you had a lot of attention on it. But now you see the bigger players come in, and you have all the decentralization of people being able to just purchase it on their phones, and you have that going on. And then you have, it's like one of the last frontiers is like if nations can do it. And it is kind of crazy because I think a lot of individuals, and I've noticed this with like people I know and stuff like that, where generally like people who are, fairly well off and comfortable, they don't necessarily feel the urgency to get Bitcoin and crypto.
Why would you?
Right. It's like, I don't need, I'm set. I can retire, when I'm supposed to, a little early and all that type of stuff. But what I've noticed is there's like a tier of people who are maybe like the comedians and stuff like that, who are like, yeah, I got like an extra $25 a month and I don't know what to do with it. And I say, like, put it in the rocket fuel. I mean, yeah, pad everything, start your accounts and be like responsible. But there is an energy of people who are sort of like, in that sort of retail sector, just below maybe that sort of like institutionally minded, maybe upper middle class people who don't need to take the risk. Yeah. Which is ironic because, I feel like a lot of people are able to go up tax brackets when they are able to invest, and you can like jump a tax bracket or 2 or 5 or 10 if you hit Bitcoin at the right price. And so I think it's kind of interesting right now what's happening with like America, where so far it seems like we're embracing it to a degree. I mean,
embracing what?
Bitcoin. Okay. In terms of institutions. And then like the SEC chair is now like he taught Bitcoin.
He was at MIT, right?
Yeah. So maybe what do you think about what's happening in America with Bitcoin, and then maybe what's happening in places like India?
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
where India has it banned, or so-called trying to ban it.
India banned it. I think Turkey was the most recent to ban it. Nigeria banned it. And these are all bans where, following the ban, you're seeing trading volumes surge. So more people are trading it now than they were pre-ban in all of those countries. What does that mean? I think that means that there is an underlying demand. I think from the American perspective, we've got it great. We're top dogs in terms of money. You bring $1 anywhere, you're going to find someone who wants it worldwide. We don't face the same devaluation that a lot of these other places, have through, their monetary policy. I remember back when I was first out of school and I was looking for, good investments and all this stuff, like, interest rates. India's offering an 18% interest rate on their savings account. That's awesome. Like, how do I do that? And it's only because they're inflating their money like 20% a year. When you have this digitally scarce asset that through the mining schedule, inflation currently in Bitcoin is like 1.75%. And that's going to decrease forever.
And that's like the number of new Bitcoins that are introduced via mining and all that stuff.
Yep. So all of the new Bitcoin entering the system, of this will eventually hit that $21 million cap in like 2200 or something. The rate at which new Bitcoin enters the market is constantly decreasing. So in a lot of these countries, same thing with Nigeria, double-digit inflation. Same thing with Turkey. I think the lira has lost like 70% of its value over the past year alone. We are very spoiled in that we have the world's reserve currency. A lot of these places with the bans, there's a reason that they're banning the. You feel threatened. And what's interesting, I love the Nigerian Senate videos. Where these guys, they're talking about this, and it seems like they just have a deep understanding of what Bitcoin represents, which is really powerful stuff. I mean, these guys are acknowledging that they can't really do anything. And, when it comes to printing their own money, of course people are going to flock to this store of value, this potential long-term store of value. So it's interesting. And I don't think it's likely that the Americans ever go full ban. I don't think they can. It's kind of like with like taxi cab drivers like wanting to ban Uber way back when, and then all of a sudden you have a quarter of the population using Uber, and it's political suicide. Why would you ban this thing? Why don't you find a way to coexist? And I think that's the path we're on. And I'm realizing I may have gotten away from the original question here, off on these tangents. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And like you mentioned with the SEC chairman, teaching a Bitcoin course at MIT, you've got
which you can watch on YouTube.
Oh yeah, I mean
for free, which is cool.
I mean, there are so many resources online with very impressive people with very impressive backgrounds who are involved in the space and sharing all of that knowledge that they have, freely. It's pretty awesome.
Well, I think it's also crazy when, there are countries that want to ban it, but at the end of the day, it's like you can't really ban it that well. Mm-hmm. You can shut off exchanges, you can, I guess, heavily restrict people's internet access or something like that. But to do that, you'd have to be limiting like basic freedoms essentially. And like the idea of countries, and I think this plays into the scarcity and the inflation stuff, but it's like the idea of like a country like India, where there's 1 billion plus people, they're very smart, and the idea of the government, it like really exposes a lot of things. Like a lot of rubber meets the road, where you have a government saying you don't get to have your wealth. And if somebody had $100,000 of Bitcoin or 50,000 or $1 million or whatever, and these are just regular folks because those people are everywhere. Yeah. You're now telling your own citizens like you can't have money, but we need it more. It's like you're really getting to some very like philosophical questions about the role that government plays and how people can support themselves, especially in a country where there is a lot of problems. It's like tragic in a way, and I think that's where like Nigeria and stuff are like they're being exposed for a lot of their problems, and it's crazy. It's like taking away someone's freedom. Yeah, it's like
that's what was going on in Nigeria too. There was this like huge women's rights movement, and you're affiliated with this movement. We don't like that. We're gonna shut down your bank account. We're gonna lock all of those funds. You no longer have access to your money. That's a human rights issue when we're talking about, the ability to transact value, to store value. It's kind of a big deal. And I think Bitcoin enables solutions outside of all. These issues are worldwide. So many issues kind of stem from that centralized control of money. Whether it's like human rights issues in terms of this women's rights movements, or people trying to flee their country. And how do you buy gold and hope that it doesn't get seized when you cross the border? How do you transfer value across borders? And I think it's cool to think about Bitcoin as kind of this like borderless transnational currency that's outside the scope of all of these systems that seek to, I don't want to say control, but when it fits their interests, they're willing to kind of step over the line, I would say. So I kind of see Bitcoin long term as a check against a lot of these policies that may cross the line between, respecting human rights, respecting, we work 40 hours a week, and for what? We save our hard-earned money, and then you're just going to devalue that because you don't have enough money? Well, I don't have enough money either. Why don't you just send me another check too? It kind of keeps things in perspective. I've thought a lot about how with Bitcoin, I think it puts a cap on the inflationary runway that a lot of these governments have. And when you think about bigger picture and say like climate change or forever wars, or why can't we find the money for healthcare and education? I kind of see Bitcoin as this thing that keeps the government accountable in a way, because if you don't spend your money wisely, if you use it on frivolous things that don't provide value to your population long term, you're going to get punished. You're going to get punished in the returns. You're going to get punished by people exiting the system because they're no longer interested in playing this game. And I think those are some of the more like heady, like big picture topics if Bitcoin becomes successful and surpasses gold, etc., that's when you kind of get into those kind of conversations about a shift, like a separation of money and state sort of thing. But yeah, that's my rambling.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the crazy part about it, and it kind of goes back to what we've been talking about. It's like, it's this like simple, pure little thing where you can you can store and send money without anyone really screwing up with you. But then it goes into all of these sort of like philosophical conversations and like political conversations, and it's just this like one little nugget. I mean, I've romanticized it, in all sorts of ways, but I think that's where like, yeah, you get a whole mix of folks where you have, people with sort of libertarian leanings where you want people to be able to send money freely. Mm-hmm. And there's pros and cons that people talk about with that we can get into. But then you also have like the sort of Occupy Wall Street, screw the 1%, which
there are huge communist movements too. I mean, you can fit Bitcoin to whatever, however creative you are, you can fit it to your model in some way if you're open-minded about it.
Right.
It's a really cool kind of, yeah, it's a fascinating conversation because you're open up so many opportunities, and everyone can look around and identify flaws and problems with the system, or why aren't we addressing this issue? Why not that issue? And not to say you can just like deconstruct all of these issues, but when you work backwards, a lot of the times I end up coming to the conclusion that, well, the incentives are all skewed because the money's all fucked up. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge, whatever your political affiliation is in the Bitcoin community, it's kind of like fix the money, fix the world. And once we kind of restore that simplicity, that kind of uncorruptible, nugget, as you were saying, nobody can mess with this. It changes how we approach our day-to-day, transactions, the way we interact with each other, what we prioritize. I mean, our time is finite. You take that time, you work a job, you turn it into money, and then let's say inflation happens and you're losing 10% of that time that you stored away for future use. I mean, that's a big deal.
Well, yeah. I think it's taught me and you and everybody who really buys into it about what money is. And there's interpretations and pros and cons where you think, okay, well, the U.S. can print a lot of money and it'll be okay because we're the top dog. Everybody wants dollars. But then, I never thought about inflation really outside of like a textbook, mm-hmm. As nearly as much as I do now. And whether it happens or not, I know I have, with Bitcoin, like there's a counter to it. And also I think it's just educating people about like, yeah, what is money? What is investment? What's dollar cost averaging? It's introduced a whole generation of people to all of these concepts that I wouldn't say have been like withheld from people, but it certainly kind of feels that way. And I'm not even like a screw Wall Street kind of guy, but it's just like, wait a minute. How do we not have these tools? And mm-hmm. now everyone does, and it's maybe the best tool ever. And all of Wall Street was maybe a little late to the game. Still not too late for everybody. Very small fraction of these places, but like it's the fact that it's introduced so many people to such a wide range of like outcomes and educational resources is like kind of insane. It goes mm-hmm. beyond just like Amazon stock. Yeah. But let's talk about maybe some of the criticisms that people have about it, where there's a ton, but there's a couple that I know people talk about a lot. Mm-hmm. One is probably just the environment, mm-hmm. and basically you need to have computers and very powerful computers to mine Bitcoin, and there's mining farms and killing the rainforest and all this type of stuff that people talk about. But what is exactly the concern that people are stating about Bitcoin mining mm-hmm. and the environment, and what is sort of your response to
Sure. My response is very different now than it used to be. I mean, in the past, you would have to argue for hours, online or in person with whoever you were talking with. You'd have to, establish, the base facts and build from there. Nowadays, you can just kind of point people to articles and say, listen, all of this stuff has been debunked, refuted. There's really no point in me arguing with you or trying to convince you of something that you don't want to be convinced about. So, I always recommend Nick Carter. He's got some fantastic articles on the energy industry. I think a lot of it boils down to people not understanding the energy industry and not necessarily understanding Bitcoin mining. They see this, there were projections, articles saying, oh my God, in 2022, Bitcoin's going to consume all of the world's energy, back during the last bubble. It's all inflammatory stuff that's meant to incite and get people riled up. Is there any truth to it? No, not really. A lot of Bitcoin right now comes down to a couple of factors. You mine where energy is cheap, and you ask yourself, why is energy cheap? Well, normally energy is cheap because these places produce so much energy that they have nothing to do with it. So there is excess energy in many places. That's why you have people in going to Iceland or going to wherever hydro is prevalent, whether it that's why Bitcoin mining took off in China too, because the government subsidized a lot of energy generation but didn't have anyone to actually use the energy. So they've got all these hydro facilities and they're not profitable. They're not bringing in any money. With Bitcoin mining, all you need is the equipment and an internet connection. So you have kind of these mobile units that are able to move around the world and subsidize energy in places that normally it would not be sustainable or even produced. Especially what I think is really cool in America right now. We always talk about carbon. Okay, well, let's talk about methane and natural gas wells. Natural gas wells just release methane straight up into the air. 30 times more potent in terms of damage done than carbon dioxide. Nowadays, we have mobile mining rigs moving around to these wells that cannot be sealed. They cannot be shut down. They've been abandoned. Whether it was right for them to even reach this point or whatever, that's beside the fact. We have these places that are just shooting methane up into the atmosphere with really no incentives to cap it. When we talk about carbon tax credits, those don't address methane gas wells that are spewing this stuff into the air. That's a lot of damage. But now we have a way to incentivize cleaning up those areas. You have mobile mining rigs moving to different wells, capturing that natural gas and burning it. Still releasing carbon dioxide. You're removing 95% of the previous damage, though. So that's a huge win in my book. It creates these very interesting incentives. And when we talk about climate change and the changing world, I don't know if there's anyone who talks about climate change and says, oh yeah, if we just stop producing, we'll just go back to the way we were. What we're going to need to adapt in the future is an abundance of energy. And Bitcoin helps kind of fuel that desire. We are able to go anywhere and produce where there is the potential for excess energy. We don't have to worry about producing too much energy now because we can subsidize it with Bitcoin mining. So when we talk about, huge population, the potential of huge population just moving, shifting, I don't want to say invading, but just full-on migration to a new country because their habitat is no longer sustainable. It puts strains on so many resources, but the number one that comes to mind is water. Well, water, we have the oceans. Why don't we just drink the ocean water? Okay, well, to desalinate that water, it requires an intense amount of energy. If we can create a system that incentivizes preparing for the sense of energy abundance, I actually think we are going to be way more better positioned in the future to handle the things that we can't necessarily predict or understand at this time. That's kind of my ramble about it, but so many good resources and articles out there. If you feel Bitcoin is this catastrophic environmental travesty, truth is it's not. I'll end it there.
It's scary. It's scary that yeah, people, should be concerned about the environment or whatever, but it's kind of scary that, like you were saying, like, people just maybe want to pull the plug, literally, on it, when it's like, there's $1 trillion in individual people's hands, and you want to, like, who says that you can do that?
No, I mean, I think it was a Georgetown professor was saying, like, I wish something along the lines of, like, I wish all the Bitcoiners were gathered onto a boat and just, like, sunk into the middle of the ocean or something like that. I mean, what do you really say to that? Do you believe the person saying that kind of stuff has good intentions? There are no, deniers or people who say, it doesn't matter. We need to have an honest conversation about the problem. You can eliminate all of America's, carbon output, this year, and China is adding more in coal power plants to negate any sacrifices made here. This stuff is too heady and it's too big picture. We get easy targets and we want to latch onto them and be like, this is so stupid. I don't see the value in it. Pull the plug. Who cares about it? But it's right. Like at a certain point, when does it become, data? When does it become just code? Can you ban code? Can you say that running X amount of code is unfair? I mean, why do you get to decide what is important and what isn't? And that's technically what, like, price mechanisms do. Price determines what has value and what doesn't have value. And to your point, there are enough people in the world who think Bitcoin's a $1 trillion asset class.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into like you would never, on your day-to-day life with your day-to-day bank account, you would never think about, like, who gets to choose what is and what is not. And it's like, that's a very basic level, but, like, right, if you come into it saying, like, oh yeah, they shouldn't have it because it takes a lot of energy, big problem, like, in terms of, like, the concept of energy, and people want to, whatever.
How do you feel about Christmas lights? How do you feel about hot tubs? How do you feel about sports racing? It's all of these industries consume, I would say, arguably more energy than Bitcoin. Just to put that into perspective, we're talking about Christmas lights here. I mean, that's, everything is so subjective, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. And it's like, it's a gateway into all of these conversations and all of these thoughts that you don't need to have, because you can speculate.
It's nice not to have, honestly.
Yeah, you can just speculate on it, but it's sort of like, I romanticize it, but, like, yeah, it can open up all these different doors to how you think about the way the world works. And, we're at a weird point in time where you have, I mean, there's always been this sort of clash between, like, what governments can do and what individuals can do, but, this really does empower people, and I think governments would be better off figuring out how to harness it than how to fight it. But it just taps into all of these themes that are happening when you go to bed at night, and you can think about them, but it's all happening, and it's just because of this computer network.
It seems so silly.
Yeah, it's crazy. What about everyone who talking about money laundering? And I was always wondering, like, okay, how are people, like, laundering drugs on it and stuff, or not even drugs, but, like, what exactly is the nefarious stuff that people are doing with it? Because I know people buy drugs, but people buy drugs everywhere, every single day. But, like, what about the critique about money laundering and people using it for illicit
ransomware, like terrorism? You hear it all. I'm not so sure anyone uses it for drug purchases nowadays, because that was the big myth about Bitcoin being this private, untraceable currency, and it's not. Every transaction is mapped. It's a public blockchain. Every transaction is stored publicly. All you need to do is identify the end users. With all of the exchanges in place, you have firms like Chainalysis, $100 billion valuation. I think one of their former guys was just promoted to, like, the head of, like, ICE or something like that. Bitcoin can be tracked. It's incredibly easy. to a lot of people, that's a problem. In terms of this argument, this critique, it doesn't mean anything. I don't want to say it's what people who maybe haven't done enough research default to that argument because you don't necessarily understand things and you don't want to put in the legwork. CIA director just came out recently with a report saying, no, that's not true at all. It's so who are you going to believe about this? In terms of crime, I think the biggest thing that annoys me is like the ransomware stuff. Like, yeah, that's shitty. That sucks. When you look at the percent, I was talking about $1 million per second. All of this illicit activity has come out, and these are government agencies saying that illicit activity accounts for less than 1% of all Bitcoin use. So it's not that the argument doesn't matter, but I think it's given far more weight than it deserves based on what the people in the field are saying. Yeah.
For other coins now, because like a lot of people want to buy Dogecoin and Ethereum and Polkadot and like all these other coins, what do you think about other coins? Because there are, people, you're heavy Bitcoin, but what do you think about other coins, like anything ranging from like Ethereum to just like the biggest Dogecoin activist ever?
I think Dogecoin is like, you can say the Dogecoin is stupid, and I think it is like stupid. It's a meme coin, but those people still like outgained me on the year. So it's one of those things where you can't, I wouldn't necessarily offer critique. I think a lot of the value in all of these different cryptos comes from the underlying network and the community that's built. A lot of stuff is faked. A lot of stuff is started with bad intentions, I would say, in terms of projects and new coins coming into the market. Everyone goes through a phase where they dabble in altcoins. I was big into Monero, like Quark, Bullberry, like all of these things like nobody's ever heard of before. And, it was fun. It was exciting. I lost money. The long-term success for me personally has come from Bitcoin. So, naturally, I'm always going to recommend it. I'm not going to judge you for dabbling in alts. Just realize that, you're gambling in a way. I mean, same thing with Bitcoin, just less risky, naturally.
What about like Ethereum, since it's like the number 2, and like with Bitcoin, we can see like the use case happen right now. With Ethereum and maybe some of these other coins that are similar, like some of the building blocks are like kind of developing. Are there other coins that you would be interested in or seeing how they play out, and what do you think about Ethereum?
Yeah. I mean, Ethereum's the big one. In terms of use cases, I think they've more than demonstrated potential use cases with, DeFi, ICOs, like CryptoKitties, all of this stuff, NFTs. There is an underlying desire for these types of things, and right now Ethereum is kind of that hot spot. For me, long term, the way I think about it is all of these coins are constantly evolving. I see a lot of the things that actually stick with Ethereum, with all these other cryptocurrencies, will eventually be built on top of Bitcoin. That's just how software development works. If you want to test your new technology on this, crypto that's worth maybe $5 million total, great. Let us know how it goes. Bitcoin itself is now a $1 trillion industry that demands trust. So not necessarily allowed to experiment in that same way. I think a lot of these coins do have value. I think they bring people into the ecosystem. I think they provide opportunities for people to explore and build, and who knows what it's going to look like. That's the thing with like this type of like emergent technology, where we probably can't even fathom what the crypto sphere will look like in a few years. We can speculate, but I mean, honestly, who knows? I don't think Ethereum is going to like flip Bitcoin and become the number one currency. I think there are unfortunately some inherent flaws when you say, hey, you can build anything. And, if you don't have proper layers, I think you just kind of bloat the base layer, and to get like super technical, it would just complicate things to a degree where you're bound to accidentally introduce errors, whether it's like bad economics, a coding error. With DeFi has been big this year, but 7 of the 10 biggest hacks of 2020 were DeFi hacks, and that's the inevitability of when you build and you try something new. You may hit it out of the park, you may have 0 flaws, but you are more likely to encounter those types of things. So I would say go in with an open mind, but also have realistic expectations that these coins aren't going to replace X, Y, or Z. And with, what's the big one? BNB, the Binance coin. I mean, that's literally an Ethereum fork where they just made a lot of like basic upgrades, and now it's like the 5th biggest cryptocurrency. So when I think about it, I think of Bitcoin being unique in that it is a store of value, and it's the only coin that really fights for that space. What is Ethereum? Ethereum claims to be like the world computer. Like Ethereum's competition is more like Amazon or like AWS. Do you need a blockchain for this feature to do this? I don't know. And you got so many different cryptos popping up with new technology that kind of builds on ETH. What Ethereum has going for it is just its rabid fan base. The users, the network, they're obsessed. They don't like branching out into other coins. So, we'll see. Who knows, really? But I think you would do yourself a disservice by not at least investing in Bitcoin if you were going to invest in the space at all.
Yeah, as I've had a couple friends who've asked me like what my strategy is, because I used to have like all the alts and all that type of shit, and it's all very exciting, and I would be like, oh, this one can do this and this one can do that, and then after time passes, it hasn't done it, and it doesn't mean it might not, it doesn't mean it never will, but there is an opportunity cost when you see other coins doing other stuff, especially Bitcoin. So like, what would you if you were to start investing today, what would your strategy be? Would it be all Bitcoin? Would you just throw a big chunk at it? Like, how do you sort of divide and like structure your thinking on how do you invest?
Yeah. I mean, I'm biased because, I'm predominantly in Bitcoin, but if I was new to the space, I probably would dabble in alts. I think it's kind of a rite of passage. You have some winners, and then you eventually have some losers, and you're like, oh shit. But in terms of current strategy, I think of BlockFi in general, where you have different crypto assets that you can lend and earn some sort of yield. So I would probably start like 50% in Bitcoin, probably 25 to 40% in ETH, and then buy other coins that had potential to earn revenue, down the line. By earn revenue, I mean like yield. You lend out your asset, you earn 3 to 6%, a year. That's what I would recommend. Whether that's viable or not, I'm not sure.
Well, one of the things that gets kind of crazy about the other coins too, and it makes everyone have to be like this coked out day trader, because one of the things that's nice about and nowadays it feels like Bitcoin and even like Ethereum are sort of like these old dogs in it, but you can at least, and especially with Bitcoin because it's been around the longest and it has the most attention and most reliable and stood through all the tests and stuff, is like you can actually use it the way it was maybe supposed to, but also you can actually feel good when the price goes up and down. The other coins, you don't really know what's going to happen, and you kind of end up having to be almost like a day trader where you need to just capture a gain.
Yeah. This is alt season.
Yeah.
Every bubble cycle, in between kind of that first initial rise and the eventual bubble, you have what's, referred to as alt season, where you have coins with super low market caps that maybe aren't, the whole Dogecoin thing, they're very easily to manipulate when a lot of new money enters the market. So we're seeing surging prices across coins that haven't been talked about in 4 years. When that bubble inevitably crashes and you're holding on to those altcoins, doesn't feel good. You may lose 60% in Bitcoin, but you're going to lose 95% in those coins, most likely. That's just kind of, we've only seen 3 bubbles, I think, but historically that's kind of the precedent. Times are good right now. Enjoy those good times, but don't expect them to continue forever.
Well, yeah, because then you have to, when it crashes 95%, you have to decide whether you're going to hold them or not. And chances are, if you're not like an experienced, chiseled trader, or you love the product, or you might sell for a loss.
Oh yeah.
And you'll learn that lesson and all that type of stuff.
Everyone does it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other thing about criticism that people talk about, and I've been asked a few questions about, like, oh, it's, everyone says it's too volatile and all that type of stuff, but it's like, you just zoom out and it's kind of good.
Yeah.
Like, enough time passes and it's good, but like, what sort of, like, explain volatility in terms of like the pros and cons of it, and also just like what does happen in Bitcoin because it's so volatile, as like, because people talk about it as a critique.
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of built into the system, honestly. Volatility, I think it comes down to risk reward. Volatile means, both ways. It can violently surge, it can violently crash. I think in a lot of ways it sorts out the like true believers, so to speak. I think it's necessary, but yeah, I think there is a lot of like valid criticism. How can you call this a currency when it's so volatile? When this just increased or decreased by 50%, how can I spend this? And yeah, that's the phase we are at right now. Volatility has been trending down since Bitcoin's inception. This is just the evolution of an asset class. If you can't handle the downward volatility, are you entitled to the upward volatility? You can't just have one or the other. So, it's a double-edged sword. You have to choose to hold it. That's really what it comes down to. The thing with these open systems is nobody's going to pull you on board. Nobody's going to force you to join. You have to do so of your own free will, which is cool. I mean, I think that's powerful stuff. Nobody's coercing you. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. If you want the potential upside, you got to risk the potential downside too. And over the long run, Bitcoin has averaged going up 200% a year,
which is insane.
That's insane. It's unheard of.
And it's crazy that people are like, oh, the price is too high. But no one's ever happy with where the price is.
Yeah.
If they're new to it, the price is too high.
Yeah. I mean, having like bought around 80 at times and like sold it for not nearly enough, I think buying at 60 is still great value because the network has never been more secure. Things have never looked so good. I think in a lot of ways, the price between 30 and 60,000 has been validated heavily by what's going on with institutions entering the market space. You're not talking about people who, previous bubbles were fueled by people who were speculating, trying to sell in a month, 3 months, whatever. You don't have like life insurance companies come in, make $1 billion investment, and then plan to sell 6 months down the line. A lot of these institutions hold for multiple years. They've got their price targets in mind, and they're not really selling. The MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor guy. I mean, if they stay true to what they're saying about never selling, 21 million Bitcoin and that Bitcoin that they bought is never entering the marketplace again. I don't know. I've never felt better about the network personally. If you're intimidated by these prices, well, don't feel bad when it's significantly higher, because the way things are going, the way things are looking, in a couple of years, that's where we'll be.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative, and there are people who, thought it was high at 5,000. They're high at 2,800, at 10,000, at 30,000, and I always just think, like, if you have $500 that you want to put in half today, and then just put in over the next 4 weeks or years, whatever, just put in the rest. And if the price goes down, then you put in more, and then if the price goes up, then you made your money.
Yeah, I think that's great.
You were talking about what BlockFi is and how people can actually utilize the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency they have to actually earn more passively. So what exactly is BlockFi and how does it work?
Sure. So BlockFi essentially takes your crypto assets and lends it out to people who want to borrow. Those people who borrow, they pay high interest rates and you get a cut of the profits. Back in 2017 during that bubble, I was looking to lend out Bitcoin, and I was shocked to find out that you could only do it if you were an accredited investor. On top of that, we're talking about like millions of dollars outside of crypto. So if you had crypto, you couldn't use it as a way to prove your wealth, and then you couldn't lend it either. So BlockFi kind of arose, within 1 to 2 years after, when I was investigating that. And yeah, they lend out your assets. You earn a monthly payment, which is fantastic. And you can then reinvest that. You can choose to receive your payments in dollars. I've been using them for about 2 years now. And yeah, it's been a fantastic experience. I've been, I always recommend BlockFi, but there are inherent risks. When the problem with crypto is that when you send a transaction, it is final. There's no reversing. There is no, you make a mistake and send it to the wrong address, you're not likely to get it back unless you know who the owner of said address is. So when you're trusting these platforms, you are inherently trusting, the competence of the team. A lot of these places have written liabilities where, if we lose all your money, we don't owe you anything. Same thing with Robinhood, same thing with all of these places, which is just crazy in my mind. But it is what it is. And, you kind of eat the risk, to earn a little reward.
So you're gaining 8.6% on your US dollars, basically. Yeah. And so, you get to use that basically as your bank account, and there's risk involved, but I guess what would have to happen, they would just have to go insolvent for your money to just go away.
Let's say the cold storage was hacked. Let's say they sent half their Bitcoin to some unknown person by mistake. I don't think that's likely. I think a lot of mechanisms are in place to prevent that kind of, human error. I have full confidence in them due to experiencing, the COVID crash back in 2020. Bitcoin dropped to 3,500-ish. And if there was ever a time for a service to fail, when it came to lending, when it came to being over leveraged, when it came to not having sufficient funds, that was the time. That gave me a lot of confidence in the platform itself. This is a company that recently received something, I think like another 300 million in funding for like Series C funding. I think it was C. I don't know. But it's been an immensely rewarding process for me, being able to earn yield and,
you're keeping your money while you're growing it.
You do not have to sell your Bitcoin. You made your investment and you don't even have to touch your investment. You just get paid for making that investment and then lending out the coins. For me, it's a win-win. It's a great trade-off. it's not life-changing money, but now it's like, okay, there's your daily coffee, there's going out once a week or whatever, however much money you keep on there. Like when it comes to personal finance, I kind of think of it as like death by a thousand cuts. You spend $1 there, $1 there, $1 there. It requires so much efficiency. So finding little ways to kind of improve your financial situation, whether it's through an additional revenue stream. Maybe it's not much. We're talking 3 to 6% here, but it's enough to help mitigate a lot of the kind of bad mistakes that I think we all make. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it's been great, and I would say I highly recommend it.
Well, I think it's one of those things too that like assess your risk tolerance, mm-hmm. where obviously all of cryptocurrency assesses your risk tolerance, and people want to know, well, what is my risk tolerance? And people view the stock market as risky and volatile and all this type of stuff. But even in your I use BlockFi. I don't put everything into it just out of my own personal risk mm-hmm. profile, but it can sort of teach you what is your risk tolerance, and that's something I've gotten a lot of value out of. And just the fact that before the pandemic, we took a CD and it got 2.4%, and it seemed really smart, and obviously in a traditional way it felt nice. But let's say if we put $1,000 towards it, we could have put $100 of that into something like BlockFi, something that would be a lower risk if we lost, and it would have earned a significant amount of money.
Yeah. It would have outgained.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of this has sort of taught me, and I think is teaching people, is like, okay, like you have a lot of utility with your risk. Mm-hmm. Yeah, put it in your 401k, do all the nice things and all that type of stuff. But like, you actually can be like, okay, I'm taking my risky asset, and then I'm taking my rocket fuel, and then I'm putting crack cocaine onto it. And the crazy thing is, yeah, we could all come back years from now and be like, oh my god, we lost all that type of stuff. But if you do the proper risk allocation, or if you are just more risk tolerant, you actually can just be like, yeah, this is actually pretty useful, and then you can keep that. It becomes less risky the more you use it. Mm-hmm. And then you start realizing like, oh, this infrastructure that's been built around cryptocurrency without you realizing it, or maybe during the time where you were like, I'm pretty skeptical of this, I don't really know. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily that you're missing out. You're just going to get in when you get in.
Yeah, there's an opportunity cost, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. It's the same thing. I think you're going to see it with Bitcoin in compared to traditional assets, where yeah, you could buy stocks, buy an index fund, it's safe. How much more safe is it than Bitcoin at this point? People would argue, it's much more safe. But there is an inherent opportunity cost that needs to be evaluated there. And where you allocate your money has the potential to impact the rest of your life in a positive or negative way. So yeah, I think BlockFi and the infrastructure that's being built does force people to think about these things. And what I think sucks is it only rewards the proactive people. Mm-hmm. You can't just wait to be pulled into this system. You need to take the initiative. I got my sister to buy like a little Bitcoin. She was super nervous about it. Very low risk tolerance. Was fortunate to buy around like 9,000. And I said, hey, listen, you've already doubled your money. Sell your initial investment and let the rest ride. And there's nothing wrong with taking gains and walking away. If you get in the water and it's a little too cold, don't feel bad about getting out. It's all okay. I think there is the potential to miss out on a great opportunity here, and that's why I advocate this stuff. It's been great to me. It's been great to the people in my life. I'm incredibly thankful for it. And I would encourage you and whoever's listening to do the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a bit, people talk about it as like a meritocracy and stuff like that, and it is, you get in at the price you deserve and all that, but you also get in when you're ready to get in, and there is a pros and cons of when you have the fanboys, sort of like myself and, other people where, people clamoring to say buy it and using laser eyes and all that type of stuff. There is a vibe that's probably not conducive to getting the sort of lay person to buy it.
Well, keep in mind, a lot of these people with like the laser eyes, which I hate, they don't want people to buy. They want to buy more. The higher prices go, the less they can buy. So that's kind of this, like, people say the community is very toxic, whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or all the other cryptos. I think the smaller market caps just get exponentially more toxic. But I think there's an inherent reason too. Like, from a game theory perspective, you don't want more people coming in and buying your favorite asset right now. You can come in later and pay me more money for it, but right now I'm still accumulating. I want to keep buying, and I want to buy more. I want a bigger slice of the pie. And I think it really scares a lot of people off. There's a reason it's compared to like a religious cult in a way. I think there's a lot of truth to that, but there's also an underlying reason. And if you can get over, that kind of fear or that facade that gets created, I think you can start to understand and see what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. I know you got to go. Did you want to mention anything about the Fed or talk about it? Or
we can do that some other time.
Okay, all right. No, that's cool. All right, well, I think that covers a lot of stuff. We definitely want to talk again.
Yeah.
And, hopefully people just sort of get a sense of, like, some pros and cons, what you can do, what you should maybe try to do, not financial advice, all that stuff. Although there is an element, I think you can say it's financial advice if you're like, put money you can afford to lose and you'll never miss, and put all of that money you can no. But anyway, well, I appreciate you talking to me about it, and we'll talk again.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Bye.